May 27th, 1905, 1:45 a.m. Tsushima Strait, between Korea and Japan. Admiral Zinovy Petrovich Rozhestvinsky stands on the bridge of battleship Knyaz Suvorov, staring into the darkness. After 7 months at sea, after sailing 18,000 miles from the Baltic Sea around the entire continent of Africa, through the Indian Ocean, past Singapore, his fleet is finally approaching Japanese waters. His men are exhausted. Disease has ravaged the crew. The ships are covered in marine growth that slows them to a crawl. Equipment breaks down daily. Food supplies are running low. Morale is non-existent. Several officers have gone insane during the voyage. One captain tried to shoot himself 3 days ago. But Rozhestvinsky has something the Japanese don't: numbers. 11 battleships, including 4 of the newest, most powerful warships ever built. 8 cruisers, 9 destroyers. Combined, his 2nd and 3rd Pacific squadrons represent the largest naval force Russia has ever assembled in Asian waters. Tomorrow morning, he will engage the Japanese fleet. Tomorrow, he will reverse Russia's humiliating defeats of the past year. Tomorrow, he will restore Russian naval supremacy in the Pacific. He has no idea that in less than 48 hours, his fleet will cease to exist. 30 miles to the north, on the bridge of battleship Mikasa, Admiral Togo Heiichiro receives the signal he's been waiting for. A Japanese auxiliary cruiser has spotted the Russian fleet entering the strait. Course, speed, composition, everything Togo needs. His staff officers crowd around the chart table. The Russians are exactly where Togo predicted they would be, exhausted from their impossible voyage, moving in a predictable formation, sailing straight into the most carefully prepared ambush in naval history. Togo says nothing for a long moment. At 58 years old, he's a small, quiet man with a weathered face in an economy of words that unsettles junior officers. He studies the chart, calculates distances, wind speed, visibility. Then he gives his orders. The combined fleet will sortie at dawn. They will intercept the Russians in the strait, and they will execute a maneuver that every naval manual says is suicide, turning the entire Japanese battle line perpendicular across the Russian advance, exposing the fleet to enemy guns while completing the turn, risking everything on superior speed, superior gunnery, and superior training. It's a gamble that will either destroy the Russian fleet or annihilate Japan's navy in the first 30 minutes of combat. What happens in the next 48 hours will not only decide the Russo-Japanese War, it will trigger a revolution that topples the Russian Tsar. It will announce Japan as a modern military power. It will change how every navy in the world thinks about battleship tactics. And it will establish principles of naval warfare that will be used at Jutland, Midway, and every major surface engagement for the next 40 years. This is the story of the most one-sided naval battle in modern history. The story of how 18,000 miles of sailing ended in 45 minutes of annihilation, and how one admiral's quiet genius defeated an empire. To understand how the Battle of Tsushima became inevitable, you have to understand how badly Russia had already lost the war. February 8, 1904, Port Arthur, Manchuria. Without a declaration of war, Japanese torpedo boats attacked the Russian Pacific Fleet anchored at Port Arthur. The surprise attack crippled 2 battleships and a cruiser before Russia even knew it was at war. Sound familiar? It should. Admiral Yamamoto studied Tsushima obsessively. Pearl Harbor was Tsushima with aircraft carriers. Russia's Pacific Squadron, trapped in Port Arthur, spent the next year being slowly destroyed by Japanese siege artillery. One by one, Russia's best battleships were sunk at anchor or scuttled to prevent capture. By January 1905, the entire Pacific Squadron was gone. Russia's response was desperate and delusional: send the Baltic Fleet. This decision made no strategic sense.
The Baltic Fleet was Russia's last line of defense in European waters. Moving it to the Pacific meant a voyage of 18,000 miles through waters controlled by Britain, France, and other nations with whom Russia had complicated relationships. It meant 7 months at sea, with no friendly ports for repairs or resupply. It meant arriving with exhausted crews to fight an enemy that had been training in home waters for a year. But Tsar Nicholas II demanded it. Russia could not allow a yellow race to defeat a European power. National honor required it. The Baltic Fleet would sail to the Pacific, destroy the Japanese Navy, relieve Port Arthur, and win the war. Except Port Arthur surrendered on January 2, 1905, before the Baltic Fleet even left European waters. The mission was already pointless. But the fleet sailed anyway. Admiral Rozhestvinsky commanded this suicide expedition. He was 56 years old, experienced, competent, and utterly aware that he was leading his men to disaster. His private letters reveal a man descending into despair even before leaving the Baltic. His fleet consisted of every ship Russia could scrape together. Modern battleships, obsolete pre-dreadnoughts, converted merchant ships, even a hospital ship that had been modified to carry torpedoes. The newest ships were powerful: Knyaz Suvorov, Imperator Alexander III, Borodino, and Oriol, 4 modern battleships mounting heavy guns and thick armor. But the rest of the fleet was junk. Ancient coast defense ships that could barely make 10 knots, cruisers with unreliable engines, destroyers that broke down in calm seas, and crews that were undertrained, undisciplined, and increasingly terrified. October 15, 1904. The fleet departed Libau, modern-day Liepaja, Latvia. 7 months to reach Japanese waters, 18,000 miles. No significant naval force had ever attempted such a voyage. What happened next was a cascade of disasters that should have ended the mission before it began.
October 21, 1904. Dogger Bank, North Sea, 9 p.m. The Russian fleet steams through the darkness off the coast of England. Visibility is poor. A thick fog blankets the ocean. Tension aboard the Russian ships is unbearable. Intelligence reports, largely fictional, have warned of Japanese torpedo boats operating in European waters, planning to ambush the Russian fleet before it leaves the North Sea. This is absurd. Japan has no torpedo boats within 10,000 miles of England, but Russian officers believe it. They're convinced Japanese agents are everywhere. Paranoia consumes the fleet. At 9:15 p.m., lookouts on multiple Russian ships spot small vessels approaching through the fog. Officers scream orders, searchlights snap on, guns traverse. Someone gives the order to fire. The Russian fleet opens fire with everything it has: battleship guns, cruiser guns, destroyer guns. Thousands of shells pour into the darkness. Explosions light up the fog. The firing continues for 20 minutes. When the smoke clears, Russian officers realize what they've done. They've just attacked the Gamecock fleet, British fishing trawlers from Hull, working the Dogger Bank fishing grounds. One trawler, Crane, is sunk. 2 fishermen are dead, 6 are wounded. Other trawlers are damaged. The British fishing fleet radios for help, reporting they're under attack by what they assume is a hostile foreign navy. The international incident is immediate and catastrophic. Britain mobilizes its home fleet. The Royal Navy shadows the Russian fleet through the Channel. For several days, war between Britain and Russia seems inevitable. Russia and Britain are not enemies, but firing on British civilians in British waters is an act of war. Diplomatic intervention prevents the crisis from escalating, but Russia is forced to pay compensation and apologize. Several Russian officers are court-martialed. The fleet's reputation is destroyed before it reaches Africa. Worse, the Dogger Bank incident reveals to the world that the Russian Baltic Fleet is commanded by nervous, incompetent officers commanding terrified, trigger-happy crews.
Admiral Togo reads the reports in Japan and smiles. The enemy is destroying itself. The voyage continues. It gets worse. The fleet cannot use the Suez Canal. British control makes it too risky politically. Instead, Rajastvenski splits his fleet. The modern battleships sail around Africa via the Cape of Good Hope. The older, slower ships take the Suez route anyway, hoping Britain won't interfere. The journey around Africa is hell. Coal supplies are inadequate. Russian ships must stop at French, Portuguese, and German colonies to refuel, begging for access because they have no coaling stations of their own. Tropical heat causes machinery failures. Men die from disease. Sanitation breaks down. In Madagascar, the fleet waits for 3 months for reinforcements from Russia, the 3rd Pacific Squadron, an even more decrepit collection of obsolete warships that should never have left port. Officers go ashore and drink themselves into oblivion. Discipline collapses. Fistfights break out. One duel between officers ends with both men wounded. By the time the combined fleet departs Madagascar in March 1905, Rajastvenski commands 38 warships of wildly varying quality, 11 battleships, including 4 modern ones, 8 cruisers, 9 destroyers, plus auxiliaries, hospital ships, and repair vessels. On paper, it's an impressive force. In reality, it's a disaster waiting to happen. The ships are covered in barnacles and marine growth for months in tropical waters. Maximum speed has dropped from 18 knots to 12 knots for some vessels. Engines break down constantly. Guns misfire. Fire control systems malfunction. The crews are sick, exhausted, and demoralized, and they still have 6,000 miles to go. May 14, 1905. The fleet passes through the South China Sea, approaching Japanese waters. Rajastvenski faces a critical decision: which route to take to Vladivostok, Russia's last remaining port in the Pacific. 3 options exist. The Tsushima Strait between Korea and Japan is the shortest route, but the most dangerous. Japanese forces control the area. The eastern route around Japan is longer, but potentially safer. The Korea Strait to the west is a compromise. Rajastvenski chooses Tsushima. His fleet is barely functional. He cannot afford a longer voyage. Speed is critical. He will force his way through the strait, push past any Japanese forces, and limp into Vladivostok. It is exactly what Admiral Togo expects him to do. While Russia's fleet struggled around the world, Japan prepared. Admiral Togo Heihachiro commanded the combined fleet from his flagship Mikasa. He was a quiet, methodical officer who had studied naval warfare in Britain and understood modern tactics better than almost any commander alive. His philosophy was simple: superior training, superior gunnery, superior speed. Japan's fleet was smaller than Russia's, but newer. 4 modern battleships, Mikasa, Asahi, Fuji, and Shikishima. 8 armored cruisers, multiple light cruisers and destroyers. Every ship was faster than its Russian equivalent. Every gun crew had trained obsessively for a year. Japanese naval gunnery in 1905 was the most advanced in the world. Gun crews practiced daily, firing thousands of rounds. They developed techniques for range finding and fire control that European navies wouldn't adopt for another decade. Japanese gunners could hit targets at ranges Russian crews couldn't even measure accurately. Togo's tactical plan was based on one principle: cross the T. In naval warfare, crossing the T means positioning your battle line perpendicular to the enemy's line of advance. This allows all your ships to fire broadside, while the enemy can only use their forward guns. It's the most advantageous position possible in a gun battle. But executing this maneuver requires turning your entire fleet in front of the enemy, exposing each ship to concentrated fire while completing the turn. If the turn is executed poorly, or the enemy gunnery is good, your fleet can be destroyed before the maneuver is complete. Togo had practiced this turn hundreds of times. His captains knew their positions, his crews knew the timing, and he was betting everything that Japanese gunnery was so superior that Russia couldn't exploit the vulnerability during the turn. It was the kind of calculated risk that separates great commanders from good ones. By May 25th, Japanese scouts had located the Russian fleet approaching Tsushima. Togo had days to position his forces. He placed auxiliary cruisers as pickets to track Russian movements. He positioned his battle fleet at Mason Bay on the Korean coast, ready to sortie on short notice. All he had to do was wait.
May 27, 1905, 4:45 a.m. The Japanese auxiliary cruiser Shinano Maru spots the Russian hospital ship Oral in the pre-dawn darkness. The wireless message goes out immediately. Enemy fleet in sight. Admiral Togo receives the message at 5:05 a.m. aboard Mikasa. He issues orders. The combined fleet will sortie immediately. At 6:15 a.m., as the sun rises over Tsushima Strait, the Japanese battle fleet leaves Mason Bay and steams toward the Russians. Togo's plan is to intercept them in the strait before they can escape into open ocean. Aboard Knyaz Suvorov, Admiral Rozhestensky receives reports of Japanese cruisers shadowing his fleet. He knows contact is imminent. He orders battle formation, 2 parallel columns, battleships in the lead, older ships following, cruisers and destroyers on the flanks. It's a defensive formation designed to mass firepower forward, but it's also predictable and slow. The weather is overcast with intermittent fog. Visibility varies from 5 to 8 miles. Seas are moderate, perfect conditions for gunnery. At 1:39 p.m., the Japanese main battle fleet appears on the horizon. Togo's 4 battleships steam in-line ahead formation: Mikasa, Shikishima, Fuji, Asahi. Behind them, 8 armored cruisers. The formation is precise, spacing perfect, speed 15 knots. Russian lookouts report the sighting. Officers on Suvorov's bridge watch through binoculars as the Japanese fleet approaches from the northeast. Rozhestensky knows this is it. After 18,000 miles, after 7 months of hell, the moment has arrived. His fleet outnumbers the Japanese. His modern battleships match theirs. His men, despite everything, are ready to fight. What he doesn't know is that Japanese gun crews have been training for this exact engagement for a year. What he doesn't know is that Japanese fire control systems are a generation ahead of Russia's. What he doesn't know is that Admiral Togo is about to execute a maneuver that will position the entire Japanese battle line to deliver devastating fire, while the Russian fleet can barely respond. At 1:55 p.m., Togo orders a signal raised on Mikasa. The message, prearranged and understood by every officer in the fleet, is simple. The Empire's fate depends on the result of this battle. Let every man do his utmost duty. It is the Japanese version of Nelson's "England expects that every man will do his duty" at Trafalgar. Togo studied British naval history. He knows the psychological power of such moments. Then, at 2:05 p.m., Togo gives the order that will decide the battle. Turn.
The Togo turn, as it becomes known in naval history, is simultaneously brilliant and insane. Togo orders his entire battle line to execute a 180-degree turn to starboard, reversing course to steam parallel to the Russian fleet. This will allow his ships to cross the T, positioning them perpendicular to the Russian line of advance, with all guns able to fire. But to execute this turn, each ship must turn in succession at the exact same point in the ocean. While turning, each ship is vulnerable, presenting its side to Russian guns, unable to maneuver effectively. For approximately 15 minutes, the Japanese fleet will be extraordinarily vulnerable. Mikasa begins the turn at 2:08 p.m. Every Russian gun that can bear opens fire. Shells scream through the air. Water columns erupt around Mikasa as Russian shells impact nearby. Togo stands on the bridge, motionless, watching the fall of shot. His staff officers crouch behind armor plating. Togo refuses to move. He stands in full view, watching. Mikasa is hit, and hit again. Shells strike her superstructure, punch through deck armor, ignite fires, but she continues the turn. Shikishima follows, turning at the exact point Mikasa turned. Russian fire concentrates on her. She takes multiple hits. Then Fuji, then Asahi. One by one, each Japanese battleship executes the turn under heavy fire. Officers on the Russian flagship expect to see Japanese ships crippled, burning, sinking. They expect the Japanese to break off. They expect victory. Instead, the Japanese complete the turn. By 2:23 p.m., Togo's entire battle line is sailing parallel to the Russians, range approximately 6,400 yards. Every Japanese gun can now fire broadside. The Russian van can only use forward turrets. Rozhdestensky has been outmaneuvered, and Japanese gunners are about to demonstrate why superior training matters more than superior numbers.
At 2:25 p.m., Admiral Togo gives the order, fire. Japanese battleships and cruisers open fire simultaneously. The effect is devastating. Japanese gunners have trained for this. They've practiced range finding at 6,000 yards. They've drilled on rapid fire. They understand shell trajectories, how to compensate for wind and ship movement, how to concentrate fire on specific targets. Russian gunners have not. Russian fire control systems are obsolete. Range-finding equipment is inferior. Training is inadequate. Many gun crews are firing battleship main guns in combat for the first time. The difference shows immediately. Japanese shells begin hitting Russian ships with terrifying accuracy. Knyaz Suvorov, Rozhdestensky's flagship, is hit repeatedly. Shells penetrate deck armor, explode in machinery spaces, start fires. Within minutes, Suvorov is burning. At 2:30 p.m., a Japanese shell penetrates Suvorov's bridge. The explosion kills or wounds most of the command staff. Admiral Rozhdestensky is struck in the head by shrapnel, knocked unconscious. He will remain unconscious for the entire battle, never regaining command. With the admiral down and the flagship crippled, Russian command disintegrates. Individual Russian captains continue fighting, but there's no coordination, no unified tactics. Ships maneuver independently, some trying to close range, others turning away. The formation breaks apart. Japanese ships maintain perfect formation. They concentrate fire on Russian battleships one at a time. Suvorov burns out of control. Imperator Alexander III is hit over 50 times, listing heavily. Borodino takes fire from 3 Japanese battleships simultaneously. The range closes to 5,000 yards, then 4,000. Japanese accuracy becomes even more devastating. At 3:20 p.m., the Russian battleship Oslavia, struck repeatedly below the waterline, capsizes and sinks. She is the first battleship to sink. Over 500 men die with her. The survivors who make it into the water are ignored. There is no time for rescue. The battle continues. Russian return fire is ineffective. Shells fall short, fly over targets, or strike at such oblique angles they fail to penetrate Japanese armor. Russian gunners are firing as fast as they can load and aim, but accuracy is abysmal. Japanese ships are hit. Mikasa takes over 30 hits during the battle, but Japanese armor and damage control are superior. Fires are extinguished quickly. Damaged systems are repaired. No Japanese battleship is in danger of sinking. By 4 p.m., the Russian battle line is in chaos. Suvorov is a burning wreck, drifting out of formation. Alexander III is listing 30 degrees, barely able to steer. Borodino is on fire. Oriol is damaged but still fighting. Rear Admiral Nebogatov, commanding the rear division, attempts to assume control, but communications are severed, signal flags are shot away, wireless is unreliable. Orders cannot be transmitted. The Russian fleet, such as it is, continues north toward Vladivostok. It's every ship for itself now. Japanese destroyers and cruisers move in for the kill.
As the sun sets on May 27th, the battle enters its final phase. Admiral Togo's battleships have done their work. The Russian battle line is shattered. Now it's time for cruisers and destroyers to finish what the big guns started. It's 7:05 p.m. Russian battleship Borodino, burning from stem to stern, explodes. A magazine detonation tears the ship apart. She sinks in minutes. Approximately 850 men die. Survivors in the water are so covered in oil and burns that rescue attempts are futile. Most drown before help arrives. At 7:20 p.m., Knyaz Suvorov, drifting and helpless, is hit by multiple torpedoes from Japanese destroyers. She capsulates and sinks. Admiral Rozhevstinsky, still unconscious, is pulled from the water by a Russian destroyer just before Suvorov goes down. He will wake up hours later as a prisoner of war, learning his fleet has been destroyed. Night falls. Japanese destroyers hunt the remnants of the Russian fleet through the darkness. Torpedo attacks continue throughout the night. At 10:30 p.m., Imperator Alexander III, listing heavily and taking on water, capsizes and sinks. No survivors. Over 800 men lost. Through the night, Russian ships scatter in all directions. Some try to reach Vladivostok, others turn back toward Shanghai or neutral ports. A few simply stop, lower boats, and prepare to surrender. Japanese destroyers prowl the darkness, launching torpedoes at anything that moves. The ocean is littered with wreckage, lifeboats, swimming men, burning oil. By dawn on May 28th, the Battle of Tsushima is over.
May 28, 1905, 10:30 a.m. Rear Admiral Nebogatov, commanding the surviving Russian ships, is surrounded by Japanese cruisers and destroyers. His flagship, Nikolai I, is damaged. His remaining ships, 3 obsolete coast defense battleships and a cruiser, are barely functional. He has 2 choices: fight and die or surrender. At 10:34 a.m., Nebogatov raises the white flag. It is the first time in modern naval history that battleships have surrendered at sea. The Japanese accept the surrender. Approximately 2,000 Russian sailors become prisoners of war. The final count is devastating for Russia. Russian losses: 21 ships sunk, including 8 battleships, 7 ships captured, 4,380 sailors killed, 5,917 captured, 1,862 interned in neutral ports. The Japanese losses: 3 torpedo boats sunk, 117 sailors killed, 583 wounded. The kill ratio is 37-1. It is the most one-sided naval battle in modern history. Admiral Rozhevstinsky, recovered from his wounds, is taken to Japan as a prisoner of war. He will spend months in captivity, writing bitter letters about the voyage, the battle, and the incompetence that led to disaster. He will be court-martialed upon return to Russia, though eventually acquitted because he was unconscious during most of the fighting. Admiral Togo becomes a national hero. Mikasa is preserved as a museum ship, the only pre-dreadnought battleship still in existence today.
The Battle of Tsushima didn't just end a war, it changed the world. Immediate military impact. Russia sues for peace within weeks. The Treaty of Portsmouth, signed September 5, 1905, ends the Russo-Japanese War. Russia cedes territory, pays reparations, and acknowledges Japan as a major power. The Russian Revolution.
The disaster at Tsushima triggers massive unrest in Russia. The 1905 revolution erupts, strikes, protests, mutinies. The battleship Potemkin mutinies in the Black Sea. Tsar Nicholas II is forced to establish the Duma, Russia's first parliament. The revolution fails, but it's a dress rehearsal for 1917. Japan's rise. Japan becomes the first non-European power to defeat a European empire in modern warfare. The victory shocks the world. Western racism assumes European superiority. Tsushima proves that assumption wrong. Japan is recognized as a great power. It will lead directly to Japanese imperialism, expansion in Asia, and eventually World War II. Naval tactics revolution. Every navy studies Tsushima obsessively. The battle proves that superior training beats superior numbers. It proves that speed and maneuverability matter more than armor. It proves that pre-battle preparation, scouting, positioning, communication decides outcomes. The British analyzed the Togo turn and developed their own version. The Americans studied Japanese gunnery techniques. The Germans revised their battleship designs based on damage reports from Tsushima. Admiral Yamamoto Isoroku, who will plan Pearl Harbor, studies Tsushima as a young officer. He learns that surprise attacks on unprepared enemies can achieve decisive results. The parallels between Tsushima and Pearl Harbor are not accidental. The human cost. Over 4,000 Russian sailors died. Most drowned after their ships sank. Many died in the water, unable to swim, weighted down by uniforms and equipment. Rescue efforts were minimal. Ships still in battle couldn't stop to pick up survivors. By the time Japanese ships began rescue operations, hundreds had already drowned. The families of Russian sailors learned of the disaster through newspapers. The government initially tried to suppress the news, but foreign correspondents reported the truth. The scale of the defeat was impossible to hide. In Japan, Tsushima became a legend. School children memorized the battle. Togo became a national icon, his tactics studied in every naval academy. The phrase Togo-san, Admiral Togo, became synonymous with tactical genius.
There's a final lesson from Tsushima that militaries seem to forget every generation. Exhausted, demoralized troops cannot win battles, no matter how good their equipment is. Russia's fleet had better battleships than Japan, larger guns, thicker armor, more ships. On paper, Russia should have won. But Russian sailors had spent 7 months at sea. They were sick, exhausted, terrified. They'd witnessed the Dogger Bank disaster. They'd endured tropical heat, mechanical failures, supply shortages. They'd lost friends to disease and accidents. They sailed into battle already defeated psychologically. Japanese sailors trained at home, fresh, motivated, confident. They'd spent a year preparing for this exact fight. They knew their equipment worked. They trusted their commanders. They believed they would win. That psychological gap mattered more than armor thickness or gun caliber. Modern militaries still make this mistake. They count equipment, tonnage, firepower. They forget that wars are fought by human beings who get tired, scared, and overwhelmed. Rozhestinsky knew this. His private letters before Tsushima reveal a man who understood his fleet was doomed. He couldn't say it publicly, but he knew. The voyage itself had defeated his fleet before the first shot was fired. Today, wrecks from the Battle of Tsushima still lie on the ocean floor in the Tsushima Strait. Knyaz Suvorov, Imperator Alexander III, Borodino, Oslabya, 8 battleships that sailed 18,000 miles to die in 45 minutes. Russian families still place memorials in cemeteries for sailors whose bodies were never recovered. Most of the dead sank with their ships. No remains, no graves, just names on monuments. In Japan, Mikasa sits in dry dock at Yokosuka, preserved as Admiral Togo stood on her bridge. You can stand where he stood, look where he looked.
Imagine the Togo turn as shells rained down. The battle itself lasted about 45 minutes of intense action between battleships, with cruiser and destroyer fighting continuing through the night. But the voyage that made Tsushima inevitable, that took 7 months, 18,000 miles of suffering, dysfunction, paranoia, and despair. Russia sent its Baltic Fleet to the other side of the world to fight a war that was already lost. The ships made it, the men made it, but they were already beaten. Admiral Rozhestvensky sailed 18,000 miles to learn that lesson. It cost him everything.